Her mother was not grieving. That was the first wrong thing. 12 years alone in that house since Davan disappeared. 12 years. And Vael was not grieving. She was rested. She was warm. She moved through her own kitchen with the ease of a woman whose life had arranged itself exactly as she needed it to. Fresh flowers on the table. Meat in the refrigerator that no one had bought. A quality of settled contentment about her that her daughter, standing in the doorway with a bag and 4 years of practice distance, could not account for, could not name. Davan Vael had disappeared on a night in late October. A long time ago now. He told his wife he was going to check on a sound in the back garden. He went out through the kitchen door. He did not come back. The investigating officer filed a missing persons report, noted no evidence of foul play, and retired 2 years later. His final notes on the case are 4 sentences long. The case before it runs to 40 pages. Nobody queried the difference. 3 weeks after Davan disappeared, something came to the back door of 14 Krell Terrace. It knocked. Vael opened it. She has been opening it every month since. Her daughter came home to care for her. She had been away 4 years. She had, in the way of people who leave small towns and build careful lives elsewhere, convinced herself that distance was a choice rather than a flight. She arrived with a bag and a composed expression, and the particular braced readiness of someone prepared to grieve a parent who had not yet given them reason to. Her name was Vael, 43 years old, municipal housing administrator. She processed other people's crises through forms for a living, and she was good at it, because she did not catastrophize, and she did not exaggerate, and she did not mistake feeling for fact. She stayed in Ashern for 6 weeks, before she stopped filing things under any category she recognized. What follows is drawn from a voice recording found in the glove compartment of her car, which sat outside 14 Krell Terrace for 11 weeks. After she stopped answering her phone, the recording is Nora's. The voice on it is steady throughout. That steadiness, in the end, is the most unsettling thing about it. If this is your first time here, welcome to Scar Howl Audiobooks. Hit subscribe and leave a like so you never miss what the forest keeps. Now stay with this. It gets darker. Ashern sits in a valley so deep that the sun only reaches the main road for 4 hours a day. The rest of the time, everything runs in a gray-green half-light that makes distances hard to judge and faces difficult to read. The high street has more closed shop fronts than open ones. There is a post office that doubles as a pharmacy and a newsagent, and an informal lending library run on the honor system. A cardboard box of paperbacks beside the door, with a handwritten sign that says "Take one, leave one," which has operated for longer than anyone can remember, without anyone being appointed to manage it. There is a pub called The Stag that serves food on Fridays and doesn't bother the rest of the week. There is a church that was deconsecrated a generation ago and converted into flats, and whose congregation, the 3 remaining members of it, continued to meet every Sunday in the back room of the post office for many years afterwards, until they died, of ordinary causes, in the ordinary way. There is one road in. It floods in the deep of autumn and stays flooded through the worst of winter. Everyone who has ever lived in Ashern knows this and has made their peace with it. The valley keeps its own schedule. It always has. Krell Terrace is the oldest street in Ashern. 11 houses in a row, dark brick, 2 stories, built a very long time ago, for the families of men who worked a mine that closed before any of the current residents were born. Number 14 is the end of Terrace. It backs onto a service lane, and beyond the lane, a stretch of unmanaged land, scrub, low thorn trees, soft ground that holds water year-round, that the council has been meaning to develop for 30 years and has never developed. Beyond the unmanaged land, the moorland begins. It runs for 40 miles in every direction without interruption. It has no name on any map. It is listed simply as common land with no further designation, as if whoever was responsible for naming it had looked at it for a long time and decided that naming it would be a presumption. Nora arrived in the last days of autumn, at dusk. The light was already gone. Ashern does that. The valley takes the dark early and gives it back late. And in the hours between, there is a quality to the air that is not quite fog and not quite cold, but something that shares properties with both. She had driven 4 hours from the city. The last 40 minutes were on single-track roads through the moorland, with no signal on her phone. and no radio reception, and nothing to look at in any direction, except the headlights, and the dark pressing against them. She had not been back in 4 years. She told herself it was work. She told herself it was distance. What it was, examined honestly, was that Asherin had never stopped feeling like somewhere she had escaped from. And coming back felt like turning around, to face whatever had been patient enough to wait. She was about to find out how patient that was. Her mother was at the door before Nora had her bag out of the car. I want to describe what I saw when I looked at her, because I think it is the beginning of everything, and I want to get it right. She looked well. Not well for her age. Not well considering. Just well. The way a person looks when they are sleeping correctly and eating correctly, and their life is arranged in a way that suits them. She was wearing a cardigan I recognized from 20 years ago that still fit her perfectly. Her garden, which I could see over her shoulder in the light from the kitchen, was tidy in the way of a garden that gets consistent attention. The kitchen behind her was clean. There were flowers on the table. There was something on the stove. I had prepared myself, on the drive, for what her GP's letter had described. Declining mobility. Managing, but only just. Someone should be there. I had built up in my mind the image of a woman diminished. The particular diminishment that comes to people who have been alone too long in houses too large for them, who have stopped cooking proper meals, started letting the garden go, given up on the rooms they don't need, because the maintenance of them stopped feeling worth it. I had prepared for grief, for the specific grief of watching a parent become less than they were. What I found was my mother, completely herself, standing at the door in her cardigan, looking rested and warm, and genuinely pleased that I had come, in the way of a woman whose life was full enough that my arrival was an addition, rather than a relief. I didn't know what to do with that, so I brought my bag in, and we had dinner. And I told myself I was reading too much into a cardigan and a tidy garden, and that I was tired from the drive, and that things would make more sense in the morning. Some things made more sense in the morning. Most things did not. The first week, Nora filed things carefully. She was a woman who filed things carefully. It was not a coping mechanism, or not only a coping mechanism. It was how she thought. She categorized. She organized incoming information into structures that made it manageable. It was why she was good at her job. It was why, when her father had disappeared a long time ago, and her mother had said on the phone, "I am fine. I will be fine. Don't come back for my sake." She had filed her guilt about not going back, under the heading of respecting her mother's wishes, and had left it there without opening it again. She filed the first week's observations under things to keep an eye on. Her mother was well. Her mother was content. Her mother's house was immaculate, and her garden was cared for, and her refrigerator was stocked, in a way that suggested regular restocking by someone. The deliveries, when Nora asked, were from a service Ida described vaguely as local. Nora asked for the name of the service. Ida said she couldn't remember exactly. Nora asked to see the invoices. Ida said she didn't think they sent invoices. Nora asked how she paid. Ida looked at her with the expression of someone who has been asked to account for something that has simply never required accounting for, and said they didn't charge, that they were very generous, that it was just something they did. The refrigerator restocked itself one night. The next morning she came downstairs, and there were 2 large cuts of meat wrapped in brown paper on the middle shelf that had not been there the night before. She asked her mother about them. Her mother said the men must have come. She said it with the ease of someone describing a postal delivery, a thing that happened regularly without requiring comment. On the 4th day, she asked her mother about the men from the church. I want to describe her face when I asked, because her face was important. She was at the kitchen window watering a plant on the sill. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished what she was doing first. When she turned around, her face had an expression. I spent a long time afterwards trying to describe accurately. Not guilt, not discomfort. Something closer to warmth, if I had to name it. The specific warmth of someone hearing a subject they are fond of come up in conversation unexpectedly. She said they were good men, that they'd been coming for years, that they brought food and sat with her and kept her company, and were very considerate about it. I asked which church. She thought about it. Genuinely. The way you think when a question reaches something you've simply never had cause to examine. She said she wasn't sure she'd ever asked. She said it hadn't seemed important. I asked their names. She said they didn't use names with her, that they never had, that she'd never thought to ask for them. She said this without any discomfort at all. And then she went back to her plants and asked if I wanted more tea. That evening I went to see Tomlin. Tomlin had lived 3 doors down for 40 years. He had been a postman on Crail Terrace for 26 of them. He had known Davan Vael. When Nora came down the terrace toward him, he looked up at her face, put the rake against the fence without being asked, and said, "You've asked her about them then." He told her what he knew, in the way of a man who has decided exactly how much he is going to say, and intends to say precisely that amount, and not one word more. The men had been coming to number 14 for a long time. He had assumed it was a church thing. He had not looked closely. He said he believed they had been coming, before Davan disappeared. Not after. Before. He couldn't be certain of the timing, but he believed it. Nora asked what they looked like. Tall, he said. Quiet. He said some things on a street like this were not your business. He said it kindly. He picked up his rake. Nora understood the conversation was finished. She went home. She helped her mother with dinner. She did not mention Tomlin, and Ida did not ask. After dinner, they watched television together, and Nora sat beside her mother and thought about before, not after, and could not find a place to put it. That didn't mean something. She was not yet ready to think about. That night, Nora watched from the upstairs window. She had moved her chair to the window before dinner, without fully deciding to. She turned her bedroom light off. When the dark was fully settled, and sat in the chair, and waited. They came after nightfall. Through the back gate, the lift and release of the iron latch, that specific sound she had known her whole life, now carrying a different weight than it ever had before. 3 of them, moving across the garden path toward the kitchen door. They were tall. Not impressively tall. Wrongly tall. The kind of height that registers as a calibration error, as if something had been assembled to approximate a human proportion, and had aimed fractionally too high in every dimension simultaneously. The legs slightly too long. The torso slightly too long. The arms hanging at a length that was almost right, and therefore more wrong than if it had been obviously wrong. They moved across the garden gravel without sound. The gravel on that path is deep and loose. Nora had walked it herself that week in her softest shoes, and it had announced every step. She watched the 3 of them cross it at a walking pace, and heard nothing from beneath their feet. Not reduced sound, not careful sound, nothing. One of them carried the brown paper package. They knocked 3 times, evenly spaced, the measured, deliberate knock of something that has learned that this is how you announce yourself at a door, that you do not simply enter, that there is a form to it, and the form matters, and you observe it. Ida opened the door immediately. She had been standing at it. The kitchen light fell across them for a moment. Their faces were turned away from Nora's angle. She could see the back of the head of the nearest one. His hair was dark and lay flat against his skull. Then she noticed the wind. The wind that night was coming off the moorland. Steady. Purposeful. It moved everything it touched. The leaves on the rose bush by the back fence were turning constantly. The edges of the brown paper package lifted and resettled. Ida's cardigan moved at the hem. His hair did not move. Nora watched it for the full time they stood at the door. 40 seconds of wind moving across that garden, and his hair lying completely flat and still, as if the wind had decided not to touch it. As if something about him had an agreement with the air that she was not party to. They went inside. The kitchen door closed. The garden was empty. Nora went downstairs. She stood in the hallway outside the kitchen door, and she could hear her mother's voice on the other side. Warm, conversational, the voice she used when she was at ease with someone. And underneath her mother's voice, there was something else, something lower. Not another voice exactly. Something at a register below language. The kind of sound the body receives and processes, before the mind has a chance to sort it into meaning. Nora stood in the hallway, and felt it move through the door, and through the wall, and into her chest, slow and regular, like a second heartbeat that was not hers. She stood there for a long time. She did not open the door. What it was, examined without charity, was that she understood, without words, that opening the door was a decision she could not take back, that whatever was on the other side of it was something she would then have to carry, and she was not ready. Sometime later, late, the darkness outside fully settled. She heard movement in the kitchen. Chairs. Footsteps. The kitchen door. She went back upstairs to the landing window. They crossed the garden in the same silence they had crossed it in before. At the gate, one of them stopped. He stood facing the service lane and the unmanaged land beyond it. Completely still. Nora counted 11 seconds. Then he turned. Not the way a person turns. All at once. The whole body simultaneously. As if turning were a setting that had been changed, rather than a motion that had been made. He followed the others into the lane. The street lamp at the far end flickered once and steadied. Her mother came to find her. Ida's face was bright-eyed and rested, in a way that had no medical explanation Nora could construct. She looked replenished. She said they had asked about Nora tonight. She said she had told them Nora was home. She said it warmly. She touched Nora's arm. She said goodnight. She went to bed. Nora stood in the hallway until the house was fully quiet. I am a person who, when she cannot resolve something, pulls records. It is not a virtuous quality. It is just what I do. Instead of sitting with the thing I cannot resolve. My father's missing persons file is held at the county records office. I drove there one morning and asked for it. Davan Vael disappeared on a night in late October. A long time ago now. Went to check on a sound in the back garden and did not return. No body recovered. No evidence of foul play. Case open. Inactive. The investigating officer was a man named Cotter. His early notes run to pages. He interviewed neighbors, colleagues, friends. He documented everything. He followed threads. He was doing the job correctly. Around the third week, the notes change. The entries become shorter. The observations become less specific. And in the final weeks of the active investigation, the notes are brief in a way I can only describe as deliberate. Not the brevity of a man who has run out of leads. The brevity of a man who has found something and decided how much of it to record, and has chosen to record very little. His final entry is one paragraph. No further evidence obtained. Case to be filed open, inactive, pending new information. He retired not long after. He moved to the coast. He gave an interview in which he said he was looking forward to being somewhere with a horizon. He said it like a man who had spent a long time in a place where the horizon was blocked by something and was relieved to be free of it. I drove home and found the prints in the garden. The prints were along the back fence in the soil of Ida's flower beds. 3 sets. Deep. A stride length Nora could not account for. With any human height she could calculate. She photographed them. She did not send the photographs to anyone. Some days later, she followed the path through the unmanaged land. It was not a cut path. It was worn. Worn the way paths get worn. When something has been going back and forth along the same route for long enough that the ground simply gives up resisting. She followed it and stopped. The ground on either side was disturbed, in long parallel tracks, regular and deep. She came back the next morning in full daylight. The disturbance was fresh. Something had used the path the night before. She went further the following afternoon. 200 meters in, the path opened into a shallow depression, ringed by thorn trees. The trees on its perimeter had their lower branches pushed back. Years of passage, repeated enough, that the branches had given up returning to their natural positions, and had simply stayed. The ground inside the depression was dark and packed. The smell was what stopped her feet. Not rot, not decay. Something living and large and old. A smell that does something to the back of the neck and the base of the spine. That is older than thought. At the edge of the depression, caught on a thorn at shoulder height, there was a piece of cloth. Dark fabric. She knew the fabric. She had a photograph on the wall of her flat in the city. Her father, standing in this garden, wearing a jacket she had always liked on him. A dark jacket with a particular texture. A slight roughness she could remember from childhood. From being carried in those arms. From pressing her face against that shoulder, she stood in the depression among the thorn trees and held the piece of cloth for a long time. Then she put it in her pocket and went home. I sat in the kitchen. My mother made tea. She sat across from me and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Patient. Careful. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation for a long time and is neither relieved nor sorry that it has finally arrived. Just ready. I asked her what happened to my father. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Long silence. Then she said, he went to check on the sound in the back garden, and he found what was making it. And after that, There wasn't anything to be done. I asked what that meant. She said it meant he knew, and knowing changed him. And what came back to the door later that night was not her husband anymore, and she couldn't let it in. She said this without tears, without the weight of grief that has not been resolved. She said it the way you describe something that happened and was then closed, in the only way that was available to you, and that you have since made your peace with. I asked her what came to the door. She said she didn't open the door that night. She said she stood in the kitchen, and she heard the knock, and she knew, the way you know certain things, without being able to explain the mechanism of the knowing, that what was outside was not Davan anymore, that whatever had been in the garden with him had changed the shape of him in some way, that made him something other than what he had been. She said she stood in the kitchen, and she did not open the door. And after a while, the knocking stopped, and she has never, in all the years since, doubted that she did the right thing. I believed her. I want to say that clearly. I believed her completely and without hesitation. She said the others came 3 weeks later. 3 of them. Through the back gate. Same as always. Same brown paper. She had opened the door because they were not Davan, and therefore they were not what she had been afraid of. And because she had been alone for 3 weeks, in a house that was very quiet, and she was, despite everything, her mother's daughter, and her mother had always opened the door to people who knocked. She said they were not unkind. Not that they were kind, that they were not unkind. As if the absence of cruelty were itself a thing worth noting. She said they brought food. They sat with her. They kept her company. She said she had been alone a very long time. She looked at me across the table, with an expression that was not apology and not defiance, just steadiness. She said she hadn't told me, because I would have made it into a problem to be solved. I sat with that, because she was right. The records, the photographs, the measurements, all of it was me converting something incomprehensible into a set of tasks I could complete. All of it entirely beside the point of what had been living alongside my mother in this house for all these years. While I was in the city with my careful life and my careful distance and my filed away guilt about not coming home, I had left her here, and something had come, and she had let it in, and it had kept her company. And she was, by every visible measure, completely fine. I was not certain, sitting there, that she had been wrong. Then I asked the question I most wish I hadn't asked. I asked if they knew I was here. She said they had always known about me, that she had told them everything over the years, that they had been looking forward to meeting me properly. She said it the way a mother says it, when she has been telling her friends about her daughter for years and is pleased they will finally get to meet. Warm, uncomplicated, a thing to look forward to. I understood then that I had not stumbled into anything, that the shape of this arrangement had always included me, that there had been a space in it with my dimensions, and it had been waiting, with the patience of something that has learned that waiting is simply what you do when you have enough time for me to step into it. I should have left that night. The road was still open. My car was outside. I stayed. The house felt like somewhere that wanted me there, not in a way I could point to or file, in a way that was underneath rational thought, underneath decision. I was sleeping better in Ashern than I had slept in years. I was eating more. The cold coming off the moorland in the evenings had stopped feeling like exposure and had started feeling like something I was adjusting to in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. 4 days after my mother's confession, they came again, not at the end of the month. 4 days, as if something had decided that the usual interval was no longer necessary, as if something that had been patient for a very long time had decided the patience had served its purpose and could now be set aside. I was in the kitchen when they knocked, 3 times, evenly spaced. My mother looked at me across the table. She said, "You don't have to open it," in the voice of someone who already knows what you're going to do. I went to the back door. The 3 of them stood in the garden, in the dark, between 2 sources of light, and Nora could see their faces clearly for the first time. They were not monstrous. There was nothing, feature by feature, that she could point to and name as wrong. They were faces, eyes, nose, mouth, all present, all in the right arrangement. But there was something in the total of it, something that registered, the way a sound registers, when it is very slightly off pitch. You cannot always locate where the wrongness is. You simply know it is there. and that your body knew it. Before your mind caught up, they were looking at her, all three, with an attention that was patient and complete, the attention of something that had been anticipating this specific moment for a very long time and was in no hurry, now that it had arrived. The one in the center held out the brown paper package. Nora's hands took it before she decided to take it. The decision came after the action. Her hands were already holding the package, and then she decided to hold it. And by then, the deciding and the having done it were the same thing. He smiled. Almost right. That is what she kept arriving at. Almost right. Close enough to right. That something in her moved toward it. The pull of something familiar, something that knew her, something that was glad she was there. And simultaneously, another part of her stood very still and noted the almost. Understood what it meant. It meant the smile had been learned, practiced, over a very long time, to reach this level of proximity to the thing it was approximating. Whatever was behind it had studied human warmth with patience and dedication and had gotten very close. Close enough that most people would not have seen the distance. Nora saw it. The distance between the smile and the thing behind it was exactly the width of that almost. She was standing close enough to feel it. She did not return the smile. My mother put the kettle on. She laid out cups. They came inside and moved through the kitchen. The way people move through a house, they know. Without hesitation, they knew the dimensions of the room. They knew where the table was. They sat in their places. I sat down. What happened in the 2 hours that followed is something I have tried many times to retrieve and cannot fully reach. I was not unconscious. I was present in the room for the full duration. But those 2 hours exist in my memory at a different density than the hours around them. I remember sitting down. I remember my mother clearing the cups. Between those two things, there is an interval I can feel the shape of, but cannot open. I remember the sound below language. Closer now, inside the room with me, moving through the air, and into my chest, and through my chest, and into something underneath it that I don't have the vocabulary to name. What I can tell you is what I noticed. When I came back to myself clearly, my hands were warm. They had been cold since I arrived in Ashern, and they were warm. Not warm the way hands get warm near a fire. Warm from inside. A warmth that felt less like a temperature and more like a permission. The piece of cloth from my father's jacket was gone from my pocket. I had been carrying it since the thorn trees. It was gone. I did not feel it leave. I have not found it since. I understood, when I found it gone, that it had been returned to something. That it had been, in some way, the price of admission. The one who had turned at the gate was looking at me across the table, not with the patient attention from the garden. Something quieter. The way you look at someone who has arrived somewhere they were always going to arrive, and you have simply been waiting for them to catch up to the geography. They left before the light was fully gone. My mother walked them to the door and came back and began washing the cups, and I sat at the table with my warm hands in the empty pocket, and I watched her, and I did not speak for a long time. She asked, without turning from the sink, if I was all right. I said I thought so. She said they were pleased I had come. I asked her in the morning what they are. She thought about it while she cracked eggs into a pan. She said she thought the right word was old. She said she thought they had been in the moorland for longer than Ashern had been a town, and that they had learned, over a very long time, to make arrangements with the people who lived closest to them. She said she thought my father had been the kind of man who, when he found something out, could not leave it as it was, could not make the accommodation, could not let the thing be what it was, and simply live alongside it. She put the eggs on the plates. She said some people are like that. She said it without blame. She sat across from me, and we ate breakfast together. And outside the kitchen window, the moorland was gray-green in the early light, and entirely still. I did not know, sitting there eating eggs with my mother, whether I was the kind of person who could make the accommodation. I think I am beginning to find out. Nora Vael's remote working arrangement was formalized by her office not long after she arrived. Her manager did not think about it again. Her weekly check-in calls with her team continued for some months after that. They came on different days, at different times. Now the calls came when they came, unpredictably. He put it down to the disruption of being away from routine. People changed when they went home. He knew this from experience. The voice on the calls was warm, familiar. It knew the names of everyone in the team and asked after each of them specifically before the call was 2 minutes old. It knew things Nora would have known. It asked the right questions and gave the right responses and laughed in the right places. Her colleague Priya, who had sat next to Nora for 7 years, stopped answering after the 6th call. She let subsequent calls go to voicemail and listened to the first 3 once each, and then deleted them without listening again. She said to no one in particular that the voice knew things Nora would have known, that the knowing was accurate, and the warmth was consistent, and there had been nothing specific, nothing she could name, that she could point to and say that is wrong, except that it had been nothing like Nora. She filed nothing. There was no form for what she would have filed. The calls stopped eventually. The last one came on a gray afternoon, deep into winter. It was brief. Less than a minute. The voice asked how she was. It said Ashern was cold, but that she had gotten used to it. It said the cold, once you adjusted, was not unpleasant. It said it had to go. It said the light was going, and she needed to be inside before it was fully dark. It said goodbye. The way people say goodbye when they mean it. Priya sat at her desk for a long time after the call ended. Then she went home. She locked her door. She did not open it again that evening, not even when someone knocked deep into the night. 3 times, evenly spaced. Anne waited, and knocked again, and was quiet for a very long time, and then was gone. She told herself it was a neighbor. Outside her window, the street was empty in both directions. At the far end, just before the road bent out of sight, something tall and unhurried moved through the space between 2 street lamps and did not come out the other side. She closed the curtain. She did not open it again. The recording found in Nora Vael's car is long. At the end of it, after she has described the breakfast with her mother and the eggs and the gray-green light on the moorland, there is a pause in which she says nothing. The recorder picks up the sounds of the kitchen, the small sounds of an old house in a cold season, the distant sound of wind, and underneath those sounds, very faintly, something else, something the air receives before the brain can sort it. Then Nora's voice, steady as it has been throughout. She says, there is something moving in the garden. She says, it is moving slowly, without hurry, the way something moves when it knows you are not going to leave. She says, I am going to turn this off now. I am going to sit here a while longer, and then I am going to go to bed. She says, in the morning my mother will make breakfast. She says, the refrigerator will have more meat in it than it did tonight. She says, I have stopped asking where it comes from. A pause. She says, I have started asking what it means, that I no longer want to. The recording ends. The moorland above Ashern is quiet tonight, as it is every night, as it has been for longer than the town has existed, and will be for longer than the town will last. It runs for 40 miles in every direction without interruption. No name on any map. Common land, listed, with no further designation. It is not empty. It has never been empty. It is simply patient, in the way of things that have learned that patience is not a virtue, but a method, and that the method works, and that it has always worked, and that it will go on working, long after the names of the people it has worked on have been forgotten by everyone, except the thing that remembers. Everything that has ever come close enough to be known. Nora Vael came close enough. So did you. If you made it this far, you already know what Scar Howl is. Hit subscribe and leave a like so the forest remembers everyone who listens. It will remember you.